Good afternoon, everyone. Look, it's 12:32 on my watch. I might kick off proceedings. We've got a, it's been, I guess, well, it always surprises me how many people we actually get coming along to these webinars, so they're certainly popular. But look, and a big shout out to Dr. Bill Hunt for giving up his time to share his fountain of knowledge with us today. How are you, Bill? Getting some calories in before we kick off proceedings?
I am. Calories. It's a little later here, so I'm a little caffeine, a little calories. We're good.
Very good, very good. Looking forward to this one. Look, before we dive into Bill's preso, just a few little newsworthy items. So, if you if you're a fan of the Ocean Protect podcast, and look, who isn't? We always. I'm staggered by how many people listening to us and our amazing guests. But look, we're up to episode number 128 now. We had our recent guest, Andy Payne, who's from Frontline Action on Coal, which was a doozy of a chat. So feel free to jump on and listen to that wherever you can get your podcast, Spotify, iTunes, etc. If you like webinars, and I assume you do if you've dialed into this one, this is our 13th webinar so far. And look, if you are interested, we've actually got all the recordings and slides of all, and often technical sort of notes or documents to support other webinars that we've done. They're all on our website, oceanprotect.com.au/webinars. And there you can obviously see the previous webinars, but we've also got a couple of upcoming webinars as well, following on from Bill's today. This one's certainly a little bit of a tangent to our normal webinars. This is looking to be a really interesting one. We've got it's about the legislation enforcement around the maintenance of stormwater treatment assets, and we've got a real panel of a real diverse panel. It's not the usual suspects. There's a few familiar faces there, Dr. Andrew Thomas and Murray Powell and Daniel Ryder being a few, but we've also got representatives from Sea Shepherd Australia's Marine Debris Campaign, and also Lee Bennett will be representing the state government as well, the Department of Environment and Science, and there's a couple other potential regulators coming on as well. If you haven't already done so, please register via the Ocean Protect website. That'll be in a few weeks' time on, 2 weeks' time on the 12th of May. Yeah, further information and to register, just jump on the website there. Another webinar that we've already got organised as well is around how to actually achieve better stormwater treatment asset maintenance, and that'll be 2 weeks after the previous one on the 26th of May, and that'll be put on by Photos and Lachlan from Ocean Protect. So again, if you're keen on further information there, please jump on our website. But obviously today's webinar is presented by Dr. Bill Hunt on the evolution and bioretention research and use in the US Mid-Atlantic. And look, for those who aren't familiar with Bill, he's a professor in the Biological and Agricultural Engineering Department at North Carolina State University, all the way from the USA. He's a professional engineer from North Carolina, and he's been active in the stormwater infrastructure field since 1997. And has designed and monitored more than 250 assets. And one of the principal focus areas of his research is vegetation and filtration-based stormwater devices, including bioretention. He's authored and co-authored more than 130 peer-reviewed journal papers, a bunch of other documents, and 2 books. Can you believe that? And he takes or leads about 20 to 25 stormwater workshops, field tours, and webinars a year across North Carolina and the USA. And a little while ago, he was actually a visiting scholar to Queensland, the land of all the ridiculously good-looking people, and the land of milk and honey. And that was back in 2010. And I think he had a pretty good time. So. Look, Bill, thank you so much for giving up your time today. Just a reminder for people who have dialed in, if you have any technical issues or comments that you'd like to make throughout the webinar, please put them in the chat. If you have a question that you'd like to ask Bill, please put those questions in the Q&A panel. Generally, it's a case of first in, first served. So if you've got a burning question that you're keen to put forward to Bill, please put it in the chat. Cool. But without further ado, Bill, again, thank you so much for giving up your time today. I'm definitely looking forward to this one. And if you like, you're welcome to share your screen whenever you like. Hopefully, with the modern wonders of modern technology, it'll work okay.
All right, modern technology.
and a pinch of fairy dust.
Yeah, there it is. A little pinch. There's a little pinch.
And the stormwater gods. Cool.
Right.
Thank you
Stormwater gods.
again, Bill. Really looking forward to this one. I'll leave it to you.
Thank you so much, Brad. And it's great seeing or knowing that there's scores of you who are dedicating a fraction of your lunch to learning a little bit about how we design bioretention and how in the mid-Atlantic portion of the United States, and how it has been underpinned in great part, but not all of it, by research. I'm going to try to share that. And I really do welcome y'all's questions. And just in case y'all is Southern, for you all, or plural you. Is there an Australian term for that equivalent?
I think we get y'all.
You get y'all. All right, good. I said I'm back in Oz. It's actually been many years, but it was one of the happiest times of my life, actually, was when I got to take my sabbatical to Australia and New Zealand back in 2010. And those guys there, you see on the left, have gotten a lot bigger. I don't know if the wallaby has gotten bigger, but the two boys certainly have. All right. So why in the world would somebody in North Carolina be interested in stormwater management? And why would we have, I don't know exactly the number now, but just say an NC State campus, my university's campus alone, we've got about 70 bioretention cells just on my campus, right? The answer is traced back to the 1990s in one of our big estuaries, which remind me of, is Moreton Estuary the one in Brisbane?
Yeah, Moreton Bay.
Okay.
Yep.
Moreton Bay. And we had something similar to Moreton Bay, where waters that drain from the state basically end up pooling in what we refer to our sounds. And it was loaded with nitrogen and phosphorus. And as a result, we had, number one, we had massive fish kills. Number two, some of the fish were actually being attacked by a bug or a microbe, a dinoflagellate called Pfiesteria. And so in the mid to late 1990s, there was what we refer to as the Pfiesteria hysteria in North Carolina. And it involved like former military dudes forming like vigilante organizations. I say this, I mean, this comes across as rather harsh, but they would ride around their boats looking for polluters, looking for dead fish. It was a big deal. It was in the news all the time. And a book was written even about the situation. And the book was called "And the Waters Turned to Blood." Now you can imagine what would happen with your elected officials if you guys had a book written about Moreton Bay that was titled that, right? They were none too pleased. But as a result, our state government passed at the time what I refer to as is the strictest stormwater rules in the entire solar system, right? Particularly with respect to nitrogen removal. This is going back into the 1990s when this was passed. And so the state of North Carolina was really left with this choice. And just for what it's worth, pounds per acre is pretty close to kgs per hectare. So 3.6, 3.4, it's all very similar. I tried to go through and adjust things to SI units, but clearly missed this one. But you get some idea that there were these limits that were passed. And as a result, our engineering community was forced to try to use practices that were tailored to nitrogen removal. All right, which brings us to bioretention. So this is the short, I'm going to let it be short because of the amount of time that we have, but audience participatory part. I'd like for you guys to, if you could go into the chat box, mention some of the project needs that you have when you are deciding on when to use a bioretention cell. So a classic case might be, I want to infiltrate more. All right. So please list in the chat some of the things you want to accomplish when you use a bioretention cell. I'm going to get some sense of how different your numbers are relative, or answers are relative to what we might say in Eastern United States. My hunch is it's not that different. All right, let's see what we got here.
Yeah,
Nitrogen removal.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Courtney.
Yeah, Courtney Henderson from Brisbane and ACOM. He says, yeah, we're often required to achieve an average annual reduction of 45% total nitrogen.
45. So nitrogen removal. That's great. And thank you for saying use. That's good to know. Y'all. Courtney, yeah, that's great. State guidelines, space allowed. Do you have any other pollutants that you try to remove besides nitrogen?
Yeah, look, in Queensland, I can talk to this. So, and actually most parts of Australia, there's a requirement to achieve the 45% or thereabouts total nitrogen average annual reduction. Then there's also the 60% or thereabouts for total phosphorus average annual reduction, and also generally about 80% total suspended solids removal, and also a gross pollutant removal target or litter removal target of around 90% average annual reduction. You can see Courtney's commented that often there's heavy metals,
hydrocarbons.
Hydrocarbons, yeah.
Okay, great. That's great. Courtney, you're the one. You're doing great. And thank you, Thea, for answering as well. Now, what I want to turn around and then ask you guys, or use, is what design elements are associated with bioretention? Okay. I'll give you another example. The storage of water, what we refer to as the bowl storage. All right, so what are certain things that a designer has to choose when she or he is considering using, when they're designing bioretention? What are some of the elements that they have to factor in? Like how much water to store in the bowl would be an example. What else do you guys got?
I'll let people chime in, but here we go.
We have maintenance. All right, so opportunities, basically maintenance access is a big one. Okay, side slopes or batter slopes. All right, great. Volume of water to store in it, that's super. The amount of land, the surface area. Filter media, how much filter media is necessary. Vegetation, that's great. Vegetation that can tolerate the types of extended plant type, vegetation depth. This is excellent, excellent. Okay, great. Thank you, guys. Those are great. Saturated zone. We'll definitely talk about saturated zone, Courtney. Okay, all right. Let me see how I did relative to what you guys. I made some guesses. Okay, and we had a lot of these. You certainly did go through TSS, TNTP. We actually worry quite a bit about pathogens. In coastal North Carolina, we also want them to look nice. We are currently evaluating. It hasn't been a big part of the design yet, but carbon sequestration potential provided by the practice, and of course, don't we all just want some world peace? All right. Now, as far as design elements go, these are the things that we as designers have an opportunity to adjust to try to meet, let me go back, these goals, all right? So the bowl storage, increasing that helps you mitigate peak flows, right? The surface area, these are things that we can adjust. And most of these, I remember seeing 4 bays, most of these, in fact, were mentioned by this very wise and savvy Australian audience. So excellent. So now let's go ahead and tackle what some of those design guidances are. And hopefully you observe the cleverness in this slide. I have both Aussie football and American football tackling going. How awesome is that? You know I love you guys, right? All right. So North Carolina established something called the minimum design criteria for all stormwater control measures, including bioretention, in 2017. And the idea was that these standards would be developed so that no matter where you went in our state is not the biggest state, it's about mid-size. We have about 10 million people in it, making it one of technically it's the 9th most populous of our 50 states. So there's a lot of people live in North Carolina, 10 million. But we have mountains, we have coasts, all right? We have a lot of area in between. And with these different topographies and different terrains, there was variation in bioretention, but very importantly, In some places, there was a wide range of consistency. There was no consistency, in fact, in what was going in the ground. So the state legislature said, you're gonna come up with design guidance that no matter where we are in the state, your bioretention cells are gonna have at least this. It can have more, but they have to at least have this. And so I'm gonna go ahead and share with you some of these guidances, or the minimum design criteria, just so you get an idea. But again, as a reminder, these things are based on research. In many cases, they're based on research that has been conducted. All right. So one of the first things we talked about was providing separation from the bottom of our bioretention cell to where our seasonally high water table is. All right. And that's anything from a third of, well, 0.3 meters to 0.6 meters. All right. I know that there are practices where, and I want to say, and I could be wrong, that bioretention in certain Australian states, you can actually hit the water table common touch. I think I'm right about this, the bottom of a bioretention cell if it employs a saturated zone. North Carolina does not allow that. They do force some separation because one of the principal goals for North Carolina is to force infiltration, all right, is to have infiltration. So then an obvious question that gets asked, if your landscape is pictured here on the left and the water table is, I don't know, let's say 0.5 meters down, 0.6 meters down, you're like, well, I can't use bioretention. And the answer, North Carolina would be like, that's correct. You cannot use bioretention. You'd have to use something like a constructed stormwater wetland in lieu of bioretention if your hydrology doesn't support it. So let's talk about why in the world this particular requirement's in place. So we did a study in East North Carolina that had pervious concrete draining to bioretention. And when it was built during a drought, all right? And this cell is pictured more or less during the drought. And then it began to rain again. And you can see a lot of water. This is not in the bioretention cell, but it's adjacent or adjoining to the bioretention cell. And as a result, groundwater soaked into or seeped into the bioretention cell. It may not seem like a big deal, but here is why that is important, is that the way we evaluate stormwater control measures is we look at pollutant load in from the parking lot via rainfall versus pollutant load out as measured leaving the drain, essentially, right? The underdrain or the final culvert leaving the bioretention cell through which all drainage leaves. And we monitored this cell for a couple of years, and you can see that if you only looked at storm events, so you identified flow into and out of the bioretention cell associated with storm events, this cell was removing 50% of nitrogen, 50% of phosphorus, 90% of sediment. It was pretty much in line with what you were recommending for Queensland, right? But when you start factoring in the base flow that was leaving in between the storm events and is leaving a storm drain, okay, that's measurable by a state entity, right? Then our 50% of nitrogen removal all of a sudden became 64% nitrogen addition because of all the nitrogen that was soaking in from the surrounding groundwater. You might be saying, that doesn't seem very fair. The bioretention cell didn't produce that nitrogen, but on the flip side, any water that the bioretention puts into the ground is not counted by the state as having a pollutant load. So if you put water and infiltrate water into the ground, then any pollutants associated with that water are deemed to be, quote, gone. All right, so you can't have it both ways. And so the state, most designers are like, yeah, we'll go ahead and take credit for the infiltration, but as such, they have to really adhere to this separation of water table so you don't start essentially leaking pollutant or discharging pollution into the storm drain network. That would have, that you could argue would have gotten there anyway, but you just don't want it coming out the tailpipe, so to speak, of a bioretention cell. Next design guide, and these numbers you see, those are the minimum design criteria. The maximum depth that we allow the water quality volume in a bioretention cell to reach is 0.3 meters. Okay, above the planting surface. Now, you can pond more. That's what that but is about. You can pond more. In fact, as of right now, you can pond 0.45 meters of water without having to convey any of it through an outlet structure. All right. And if you do want to convey water through an outlet structure, so you get some peak flow mitigation, then you can actually put 0.6 meters of water above your bioretention surface. That would be above, in this case, the mulch layer associated with the bioretention cell. All right. This is actually some change because a lot of designs in the eastern United States have kept bioretention ponding depth to 12 inches. You guys do know 12 inches, 0.3 meters. If I slip up and go to English units, you know why, okay? But some states have pushed it out, North Carolina being one of them, and more states are allowing more water to pond. But part of the reason why there is a restriction to ponding is this fear of overall plant health, all right? Plus, so many bioretention cells that we put in the East Coast of the United States are put in car parks or parking lots. And as a result, they usually don't want to have the water ponded a meter next to the parking lot. Otherwise, they've got to put fences and whatnot around it. And so a lot of it is driven by where these things are being located. But you will get no pushback if you restrict your ponding depths to 0.45 or 0.6 meters in North Carolina. And that is becoming more of the norm across the eastern United States. Okay, I am going to come back to some of the other minimum design criteria, but when we start talking about bioretention cells, we need to discuss underdrains. Now, I know there's a different term used for this in Australia. We'll get to that in a second, but this is required of every bioretention cell in North Carolina as long as the underlying soil has an infiltration rate pre-construction of something less than 50 millimeters per hour, okay? So if it's more permeable, then you don't need to use any underdrain. In fact, if it's more permeable in North Carolina, then people will just build a shallow bowl and let the water just infiltrate. So a bioretention cell tends to not even be used if you've got infiltration rates exceeding 50 millimeters per hour of the underlying soil, okay? But for those that have somewhat lower infiltration rates, then you have to use an underdrain, and the underdrain must be what we refer to as an internal water storage zone. And I'm going to tell you why we don't call it the saturation zone. And the reason we don't call it the saturation zone is that this is not intended to necessarily stay saturated. It will get saturated for a little bit, and then it basically infiltrates. So this ends up being what we refer to as an infiltration enhancer. And coming out, you can see the elbow at the bottom, right down here, and then the standpipe. So that's an example looking down at one of our internal water storage zones that was embedded in the media. This is during the construction. And I see it says my connection's unstable. Okay, so if it says unstable, I'm going to pause. Hopefully I'm back to normal for everybody.
No, it's still coming okay through to me, Bill.
Thank you,
So
Ben.
it paused a smidgen before, but
Okay.
seems to be okay.
Okay, good. Well, you can imagine media being brought into this and burying that pipe, but here's another example of an internal water storage zone. Again, most of our sites, and I know you guys refer to them as saturated zones, all right? North Carolina, and this is a picture I took when I visited Victoria outside of Melbourne. And one of the differences at the time, and I must confess, I did not go look at your most recent iteration of biocell design and bioretention cell design, but the Australian version at the time got the water very close to the surface. I want to say maybe 10 centimeters from the surface, where ours, we're keeping the water 30 centimeters or 55 centimeters from the surface. All right. So there are some 45 centimeters from the surface. So there are some differences, and we don't line our systems typically, so because we're wanting the water to infiltrate. That's a big part of the design in North Carolina. All right. So you will recognize our internal water zone being something very similar to y'all's saturated zone, but there is that difference. So here's an example of an internal water storage zone at work. Okay. Now, if that doesn't make you want to go to the bathroom, I don't know what will. All right. So how well does it work? And the reason that it's not optional in our state is if you have a bioretention cell and you have underlying soil infiltration rates that are less than 50 millimeters per hour, you must use it. All right. There's no questions. There's no discussion. You must use it. And part of the rationale behind it is from some of the studies that have been done. So for example, I'll have you look at the sandy clay loam site. So we had a couple of different internal water storage zones here. And you can see that we had between 70 and 85% of the water either soak into the ground or evapotranspire when using internal water storage. And again, those are good numbers to put that much water, quote, out of the way, all right, or the pollutant load associated with that much water to basically disappear from the calculation really drives engineers to want to use this device with the internal water storage. We also have been able to model it. And I'm not going to get into the details. I know you guys have the magical model of Australia with music, the magical music model of Australia, of Melbourne, in fact. That's if you want to go 4 amps, magical music model of Melbourne. Okay. And so we have a different model we use, but the same idea of being able to model these practices. This one happened to be an agricultural-based model, so it really did a great job of looking soil water characteristics and the like. But so we monitored a 0.9 meter media, hydrologic soil group C, which is pretty tight, without an internal water storage zone. And I'm asking you guys to all take a look at the red curve, which is the water that drains out and under drain, and the purple curve down here, which is the amount of water that exfiltrates. And we kept everything the same, and all we did was we put an internal water storage zone in there. And just take a look at what that purple line does. We go from 2.5% exfiltration for a appropriately, proportionally sized bioretention cell to 25 to 30%, right? And all you did was just put an upturn elbow or a T with an upturn, and that was it. And so as a result, with very limited investment, the improvement in performance was so great that this is, again, there's no questions asked. You have to use internal water storage. Again, we don't line them, so the water is soaking through, all right? It's basically infiltrating out of the cell, but you have to use that in North Carolina. Okay, so how deep does the media need to be? That's obviously a big question because it leads in great part to the expense of your bioretention cell. I don't know if you guys know, but when they started designing these, well, I say design, it's no air quotes, it's for real. When they was designing these things back in Maryland in 1993, I believe that was the first time the term bioretention was coined, they basically picked 4 feet deep. Now, I'm going to demonstrate to you how they figured out how it should be 4 feet deep. Hopefully everyone can see me. I'm going to provide a little bit. This is how the good folks in Maryland decided that we needed 1.2 meters of media depth. You ready? Watch closely. They just grabbed it right out of midair, okay? And so a good chunk of what we have done, and I know research that's been done at Griffith and research that's been done at, come on, the one in Melbourne, Monash, has really focused on, one of these that really focused on how much media depth we really need to have, because it's expensive, right? And plus the type of media is important, and we'll talk about that. So the short answer is a bioretention cell can have as little as 0.6 meters, all right? That's a very rare case that would actually be employed, but it can be. So as few as 0.6 meters to a more likely 0.75 meters if it's grass line. And we do absolutely use turf grass as a liner based upon studies that have shown that it works just in the short term, just as well as tree shrub mulch systems do. Now, in the long term, my bet is that the tree shrub mulch systems would actually work better, okay? But for many reasons, not the least of which is you can use a little bit less media depth, the turf grass line bioretention cells have become the most popular type of bioretention used in North Carolina. Some of the main reasons, and I noticed Brad talking about asset management and maintenance, is that mowing is very easy. Like you tell the maintenance crew, I want you to mow. Yeah, they got it. They can mow and they can weed whack. All right. So a lot of designers and property owners want to have a very easily maintained system. But another reason is it's hard to hide in that. And sometimes our bioretention cells are being put in places where there are people, and this sounds bad, but they want to avoid crime, right? They want to avoid people hiding in the veg, spook somebody, right? In terms of just total performance, it is still my belief that a tree shrub mulch system over the course of the long term probably does work better. All right. But while we have monitored one of these guys in the long term, we haven't monitored a grass cell in the long term. So as of right now, people can use both, and people do use both, but the grass cells tend to be a little bit more popular. Okay. Now let's talk about the mix of media. Medium is I'm sure it started. I know a lot of research was also done again at Griffith. In fact, Courtney, I think you were a part of that a long time. Well, it was a while ago, right? And Monash, and focus a lot on what should comprise the best media. Like almost like we say in the United States, it's like we're squeezing juice out of a turnip to try to find the best type of media, right? And we've done that to some extent here, all right? And then finally it says like, we're going to go with this one. This looks fine. This is good. Let's go with it. And so there's a mix. You have to have medium and coarse wash sand. I'll explain why the medium coarse wash is specifically important. And then a fraction of fines, and then obviously a fraction of organic matter, and all that's in there. So you make sure you are removing things like nitrogen and metals and pathogens. Like there's a reason that this mix has been put together so you can remove all these different pollutants. So like we used to get media analyses that just specified they were coarser, so to speak. They would say how much organic they had, what the fraction of fines were, the fraction of sand. And we found that just reporting the fraction of sand was not enough. That knowing what the fraction of coarse and medium sand was relative to fine and very fine sand would prove quite important, because we observed many bioretention media clogging in North Carolina when we didn't refine the media mix to exclude fine sand and very fine sand, all right? Or at the least to put in the very fine sand and fine sand as a part of the sand silt calculation, all right? So it is important in our state, based upon a lot of failures, just to be honest, to be careful with what fraction of very fine sand we have in there. And so as a result, they actually exclude it specifically from the media mix. And you might say, that seems tough. Look, the media suppliers, they figure it out pretty fast. If you tell them they can't have it and you inspect them and then you make them replace it, if it includes too high a fraction of fine sand, guess what happens? Media suppliers figure it out. Okay. Now, in nitrogen sensitive watersheds, which not all of North Carolina is, then the amount of fines, again, clays, silts, and essentially very fine sand, is allowed to bump up from what was 8 to 12% to now 10 to 15%. And the rationale behind that is that you are allowing the water to stay in the media for a little bit longer because you've ramped up a little bit of the soil particles that slow down the flow. And by increasing your retention time, you give yourself a better chance of nitrogen removal. I'm not going to show you the data on this, but we totally observed that. All right. We have a lot of data that show, hey, it's like a fine, with bioretention, it's like a fine line. You want to keep the water in there long enough so you get the treatment, particularly of nitrogen. And we also worry about temperature in our state, so we can cool it down. But not so long that it becomes a wetland and becomes anoxic and stuff like that. All right. So this was the fine line is walked as 10 to 15% fines. Okay. Now, a little bit about the media consistency. In addition to having basically talking about grain size, it's also important that we do not add phosphorus. And again, Brad mentioned that phosphorus is one of the pollutants you're trying to get rid of, right? And so sometimes, if you're not careful about where your media comes from, you can bring phosphorus with it. Now, in North Carolina and in many other eastern states, New York State is another one, a phosphorus index has been created. It's a simple number that in theory goes from 1 to 100, though you can go beyond 100 if it's super saturated with phosphorus. It basically says how much phosphorus is in the media or in the soil to begin with. And so 50 is the neutral point. Like, it's not good, not bad. So if you're in a watershed or a catchment area that has a phosphorus removal requirement, then you want to not be at the median point. You want to be at a more conservative point, and that's 30. All right. So I'm going to explain where this comes from. This is my PhD research from 2000, and all right, that's years ago. That's a long time. This was one of the sites, and the media that went into this particular site was literally taken from a farm about 15 miles up the road. So a good 23 kilometers, okay, up the road. They basically went to Farmer Brown's site, took his soil, it met the screening, the sieve size and all that, brought it down and dumped it in, okay. And then at the same time, I was also studying another site in Chapel Hill, all right? And let's see if I can get rid of that. And that site in Chapel Hill, the designer got the media from a local mine. They have sand mines there. All right, so we have one from a farmer, one from a sand mine. Here's how well those two soil sites remove phosphorus. In Greensboro, we didn't remove phosphorus. We added 240% more phosphorus. Like, that was bad. But at the same time, in Chapel Hill, we took out 65% phosphorus. And at that point, I'm like, what is going on? So I talked to my soil science friend, and she said, Bill, what's your P-index? Well, after a pause, because I didn't know what a P-index was, I'm an engineer, all right? I did a little reading with my soil scientist friends, and they're like, oh, okay. So that's when I learned what it was. And so the Greensboro site was essentially right at saturation. And what's going to happen when you have a media that's right at saturation with phosphorus and start pouring all this water in every time it rains? Well, it's going to disassociate. Essentially, it's going to leak phosphorus. In Chapel Hill, on the other hand, we had a really low phosphorus index. I had a lot of capacity to capture phosphorus. And so we took 65% out. All right. So that's a very important check that all of our media have to have in our state. And it's very important to note that composts can be particularly problematic from a phosphorus addition standpoint. Here's a compost. Remember I said 100 is the saturated state? Well, here's a compost where the phosphorus in it is 132. All right. So compost is often supersaturated. That is a problem. All right. We don't bar compost from being used. Okay. But we do say that when you take all that media, the organics, the sands, the fines, and you mix it all up, your P-index better not be over 30. So if your compost is 130, you're not going to have much compost, right? And so that's essentially how this all works. All right. So can you use compost? Yeah, you can, but it's going to be in very small quantities because they carry with them very high nutrient concentrations. And we care the same things you do in coastal Australia about making sure we don't have a lot of nitrogen and a lot of phosphorus leaving. Okay. Now, I would be interested to see how you guys deal with this. As of right now, you're not allowed to mechanically compact the media in bioretention. That is a lot easier said than done. All right. Nowadays, most of the time, it's simply just watered in. They'll tap a fire hydrant and literally water the media in, and that does work. Smaller systems, people might even just walk on it. All right. That's something that I think we are going to change at some point. I think COVID impacted our ability to study that, but at some point I think we can get money to study that. Okay. Now, the media is required. So if you're a professional engineer, and in some cases a registered landscape architect, and you've designed your bioretention cell, you have to confirm that, to the best of your knowledge, that drawdown rate of your cell is going to at least be 25 millimeters per hour. Okay. Which means if it rains and it fills up, and it fills up 30 centimeters and we're drawing down 2.5 centimeters an hour, that in 12 hours, your bioretention cell is not going to have puddles in it anymore. Okay. And so the designer has to put his or her stamp on there. Now, what that means is the designer is committing to make sure that the bioretention cell is constructed right. That's a big deal, okay? Because if you're not there, we know that bioretention often gets abused. Like this is a case where it's been over 24 hours since the rain and it's still pooled with water. That's because during the construction of this project, a lot of construction sediment got in there and clogged that sucker up, okay? So the designer now has to say, yeah, I'm gonna promise you that we're going to maintain this drawdown rate, but to do that, that designer has to be present during construction. Okay, and it also means that activities have to be, and they do require certain times, like you can't drive. Maybe I know Australians do it because we do it too in the South. I bet you it's a Queensland hobby of finding stormwater control measures, and if it's grass or it doesn't have a ton of veg, like let's just hop the curb, baby, and drive it through. You guys have those like we have pickup trucks, but you guys have those El Camino-like cars. What are they called, Brad?
I think you mean utes, utilities.
The utes, yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Right. Those low-lying, I know there's the Holdens and the Fords. We have the same thing here. They're Fords and Chevy pickup trucks, right? And I don't know about you guys, but we, like, people get the pickup trucks and they're gonna drive through this stuff, right? Well, that obviously can cost some damage. And you know, it might be ridiculous, but like we have to put up signs sometimes that please don't drive your cars here. Maybe that's just America. But I think you guys, Australia is a lot like us. At least I think. Now, I hope you're not hurt by that, my fellow Australian. Well, I'm not Australian. Hope you're not. Hope I say that like hugging you, embracing you. I think we're a lot alike. Okay. All right. So we'll skip through now. So one of the things that the designer can do is right before they walk off the site, he'll run double ring or she'll run double ring infiltrometer tests, or we do use these modified Philip-Dunne infiltrometers. They're very handy. I don't know if you have them there for sale. I'm sure someone else in Australia makes something very similar, but this is like every time someone builds one of these bioretention cells, this thing is being used to evaluate the drawdown rate. And I don't think this test works. I'm gonna skip through it. Okay, so the point I'm really trying to hammer home is overcompaction has traditionally been an issue, particularly when if the media has pretty high clay content. And when that happens, and we have overcompaction, cities are coming in and they're literally, jurisdictions are going in and they're making people replace that media. It doesn't have to happen but once or twice before the word gets out on the street and people don't mess around on that anymore. The planting plan is obviously important. You guys talked about this, like one of the things you think about as a designer. In North Carolina, we have a 50% coverage rule, not 100%, but from a canopy perspective, a 50% coverage rule after 5 years of planting. After planting, people are like, 5 years, how are you going to know? Well, the thing is, engineers like me, we don't know. That's not in our wheelhouse. As a result, they will basically go to horticulturalists or landscape architects who will pick out planting plans, who will then put their stamp down that this is going to work right, look right. That will say after 5 years, we'll at least have 50% coverage. All right. And the plants, I know a lot of research has been done in Australia about the optimal types of plants to be used. We've done some here as well, but still the thing that drives it is, does it look good? Does it survive? If it looks good and it survives, then the property owner wants it. It can be the best nitrogen sequesterer in the world, all right? But if it doesn't look good, people in the United States are like, we don't want that. We don't want it. Looks matter. And you are trying to sell this practice, not just for nitrogen removal, but also for the aesthetics that it provides, okay? We are generally fans of keeping them open, in great part because it has been observed through research that sunlight penetration is one of the things that helps kill microbes. And I mean microbes, I mean the bad guys that make you sick because of GI issues, okay? And so that's a big deal a lot in our coast. So a lot of our bioretention cells at the coast are either grassed, all right, we have great sunlight penetration, or you have, the planting looks like this, so that there's a lot of sunlight penetration to help kill things like E. coli or the true pathogens that we worry about. Okay, you can also use sod, we talked about that. And that it is important, I alluded to this earlier, but it is important that these look good. That really matters. We have found, in fact, we just recently completed a study that showed that practices that looked good tend to be more frequently maintained. I mean, I kind of like, how many of you drive a car that is in tip-top shape? You probably are pretty good about making sure that sucker gets into the shop. You know, you look at my car, I drive a 2003 Honda minivan, pretty good vehicle, I might add. It's got about 400,000 kilometers on it. Not bad, right? But, you know, it doesn't look great. And I probably should maintain it more. And now I'm just like, it's a Honda. That's probably very short-sighted of me, to be honest. And then the last thing I want to talk about from a design perspective is mulch. For a long time, we required hardwood mulch. We didn't like pine straw because it floated too easily. Pine bark because it floated too easily. I forgot to put this in SI, but 5 to 10 centimeters thick of mulch. But it's gotten to the point now where a lot of us are beginning to use gravel. I actually think gravel is fine as a mulch. One big advantage gravel has is it does not float, unless you have the unfortunate distinction of choosing pumice as your gravel, and then, dude, you just blew it. Okay. And then clean out pipes. We do require clean out pipes in all of our bioretention cells. There's a few of my colleagues that do not like this rule simply because people in lawnmowers will bang into those guys, right? And once they bang them, they break them. But it is required because there are access portals to the bioretention cell, and in theory, someone that's maintaining them can take a look at and see if things are working. If you do use them, while it's not a requirement, it's now recommended that you use what we refer to as concrete donuts. I suspect y'all call them the same thing. And you basically put those around the clean out pipe so a mower can't do damage to it. And they're not exactly attractive looking, but those do work. Okay, the last thing I want to talk about is these things do work. And they work over the course of time. So in 2001, I actually showed this site to you earlier. This was my bioretention cell. And I was given a grant. We monitored 2001, 2002. Well, I was given a grant about 15 years later, 16 years later, to study that site again. And if you take a look, I mean, that's what it looked like in 2001, same site, 2017. All right. And what we found is the red bars are the monitoring from the initial period, and the blue bars are the monitoring during the second period. And you can see here, for example, that we have reliable, like the performance got better with time. So here's like the nitrogen concentration change so the beginning in the red period, so as it came in and as it left, it actually went up a little bit concentration wise, but load wise it got reduced. But then in the second monitoring period, it got better. All right, so basically with time, the bioretention cell appears to work better from a nitrogen perspective. You can see here from a phosphorus perspective, you can see there was, I mean, essentially no change in concentration from pre and pre-out. It was actually quite variable pre-out. And then in the first period, and then after 16 years of maturation, the concentrations got better. All right, that was lower leaving. This is really good news. It means that with some time, and we actually had another study looked at how long it would take for the phosphorus to fill up all of our available media sites. And we're talking something between 50 and 100 years. Okay, what was different between 2001, 2002, and 2017, 2018? Well, there it is. Vegetation is our long-term friend. Some of you are like, I don't have any friends. Go hug a tree. They'll be there. They'll be there for a while, and that tree can be your long-term friend. All right. I'll skip through that. It's not that important. So your take-home points on the maintenance side is these are some of the basic things that need to be done, but that last bullet's really important. That well-maintained practices are like fine wine. They get better with age. At least that's what they say. You guys have some great Shirazes. I know Australia. So with that, this is actually my brood. When I was in Oz, there were 2 people out. One was in utero, and now and I'm done, trust me, 5. But it's great. And this picture might as well be Australia in the outback, but the reality is that's in Utah in the United States, which is a lot like the outback. So with that, I'm happy to answer some questions, Brian.
Cool. Thank you so much, Bill. That was fantastic. Very interesting insights and perspectives from your neck of the world. Look, we've had quite a few questions come in already, but I guess a reminder, if you do have a question for Bill, please put it in the Q&A. One of the early questions was from Thea. Thea asks, most councils don't allow us to model exfiltration, even if the basin is unlined. Modeling bioretention with a saturated zone with no exfiltration in music produces a larger filter area than a non-saturated basin. Any ideas why that would be?
All right, so let me see if I can follow this along. So you have more filter needs if you use a saturated zone. So more filter volume associated with the saturated zone than without?
Yeah, it's a bit of a tricky question. I think you might not be as familiar with music as some of the Aussies on the audience. So it can happen, it does depend on the nature of the filter media. It might be a bit of a music techo question. So obviously, when you've got higher rates of concentrations of total nitrogen and orthophosphate in the filter media, it can have more leaching. That might be why Thea is encountering this. But it's interesting around the issue of exfiltration. Like, yeah, look, Thea's right. There's certainly a strong push to actually line bioretention systems in Australia when there's a saturated zone present. So it's just interesting how you guys seem to do it kind of differently.
We do, and I can tell you the rationale for lining them is that you are much more reliable. You're going to more reliably reduce your nitrogen concentration, okay? Because you're creating the environment where denitrification occurs, and it's staying. All right, it's just reliably present. It all comes down to how do you evaluate pollutant load discharged. And it's not just North Carolina, almost across the entirety of the United States. Water that evapotranspires or exfiltrates is assumed to be removed from the storm drainage network, okay? And so it is always in our interest to put said water in the ground if you can. All right. Now, the next question is, well, it's not really removed because it's in the ground now. I get that. But when you do look at bioretention concentrations that are leaving through an internal water storage zone, especially, even though it's not as reliably saturated, it is saturated for some of the time. And as a result, it has low concentration. And that's the concentration of the water that's actually soaking into the ground, which then has to eventually pass through a buffer. So then the question is how do the concentrations leaving a bioretention cell with an internal water zone compared to, say, what's in a healthy creek? And we found that the concentration of nitrogen leaving bioretention on average is equivalent to something in excellent health of a creek. And so that's why in the end, it's not just North Carolina. Again, it's most states in the United States. We're like, if you can put it into the ground, we're going to allow you to count that as
you just paused at my end.
Sorry, pretty significant. Yeah, so we don't line it.
Look, actually, there's a couple of questions in relation to sort of Thea's question around size, and this is actually one of the things that I noticed was missing in your criteria. And Rob Booker from Sunshine Coast Council asks a similar question here. How big are these bioretention systems relative to the size of the upstream catchment? So to give some context, in Australia, it's generally about 1 to 2%, or 1 to 1.5% of the upstream catchment. So filter area size relative to contributing catchment area. What is there a general size or a mandatory size for bioretention systems in North Carolina?
No. But 1.5 to 2% is pretty. By the way, the Sunshine Coast is one of my favorite parts of the world. Just love the Sunshine Coast. I would love to be at the Sunshine Coast right now. No, what it's based on, as you might guess, is a volume of water that is required to treat.
Mm.
And the more heavily impermeable your watershed, the larger that volume of water is going to be, and therefore the larger the size of the practice will be. So we will have some applications, particularly at the coast, where we're looking at the 80 percentile rainstorm, where the bioretention cell can be 5% the size of the catchment area.
Yeah.
But most of the ones, say on campus, are going to be probably closer to 2%. Yeah. Probably closer to 2%, but they can be 1.5% too.
Yeah, okay, that's interesting, because generally the advice I've had previously from the States is, yeah, it's generally around about 5%. And obviously, as you indicated, there's a strong preference for the use of mulch in treed and shrub systems. So that obviously reduces the sediment deposition rates in the filter media as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we do, I'm telling you, we use a lot of turf grass now. As soon as the state allowed it, and it's all about asset management, like they can hire somebody that's already mowing, come in and mow that bioretention cell once a month.
Look, I'm going to have to probably charge through some of these questions because we're running out of time and they're still pouring through. But Blake Ellingham asks, could we get an outline of the infiltration test that you guys do and how it is conducted?
Oh yeah, sure. What I'm going to do is, so he wants the modified Philip-Dunne Infiltrometer.
Yeah.
There's a journal article that's been written about it, and you can Google that. All right. You may hear a dog. That's possible.
Okay. I've got two at my end as well. So that's all good.
You may hear a dog in a second. But the modified Philip-Dunne Infiltrometer, you can Google that. But there's also an article that's been written on it. But it was tested by the University of Minnesota, and we've had good luck with it. We've had good luck with it.
Okay, just another question from Courtney Henderson.
Yes.
In your experience with unlined systems, have there been any issues with geotechnical stability near road, pavements, or buildings?
Yeah. Had there been any? Yes. Had they been rare? Yes. And as a result, we do see our bioretention cells that are up against buildings. Those are aligned.
Yeah.
Okay, so in what we would consider an ultra urban application, where it's literally next to a building, the bioretention cell will be lined. But our Department of Transportation uses bioretention along our highways. None of those are lined.
Yeah.
None of them.
Tim Davies asks, is there a concern regarding using trees in bioretention systems? In your experience, have they impacted the underdrainage or caused any issues?
Oh yeah. A lot of people ask that. No.
Yeah.
That's a common question. Now, it's important to know, and I talked to a maintenance guy about this not that long ago. He said that they will see tree root invasion in some of the older bioretention cells. All right. Remember, but he says it only once has he seen it literally clog and totally block flow. But remember, with internal water storage, as well as with saturated zone, the water is kept at a much higher elevation, and the plant roots don't have to migrate down as far to get to the water.
Yeah.
So we have not had that as an issue.
Yeah, I actually did a paper on this very issue several years ago. Tim, I'll email you a copy of it. But look, we had CCTV cameras up piped and, the underdrainage of treed and non-treed systems. And yeah, you're bang on, basically, in short. Just charging through some of the other questions is, Matthew Potter asks, are you building systems that aim to achieve volume reduction, i.e. retention to protect waterways, rather than filtration systems with underdrainage to strip pollutants, but release filtered runoff downstream?
Yes, the answer is yes. That not all of them are. We have bioretention systems that go in for the following purposes. One, they put them in our trout streams. Trout fishing is very popular in Western North Carolina because they cool water down, before it's discharged. Two, we have them go in to kill pathogens along our coast. And those tend to be very shallow systems, grass covered, The bioretention cells for the trout waters are much deeper. They're going to be a meter deep, at least, if not 1.2 meters deep. But we will also have certain, I know you've heard the term low impact development. Low impact development is really based on hydrology, pre and post development hydrology. And in any bioretention cell used in what is a low impact development, sort of compliant development. All right, so it's truly a low impact development. And then there's a reason to be in a low impact development in North Carolina or Maryland, is that if you are, if you can prove that you're a low impact development, you don't have to worry about anything else from a stormwater standpoint. That's the the gold standard. Okay, and so those bioretention cells are put in for annual volume mitigation. The one thing that bioretention tends not to be used as solely is for peak flow mitigation. It can be the newer design standard where I talked about it can pond 0.6 meters now in a cell. That gets at allowing bioretention to maybe be used for peak flow mitigation for 2-year storms, 5-year storms. But when we have 25-year storms, they don't worry about peak flow mitigation in the bioretention cell. I'll have something else in the catchment that does that. But yeah, we have bioretention cells meeting all sorts of requirements. And their design does vary as a result.
There's been a lot of questions about that. What's the design criteria? How do you size them, et cetera? So that's been great. This could be a bit of a killer question. And it's from Leonid Bronfen-Trinker, which is a fantastic name. So well done.
Trinker, that's German for drinker.
And full disclosure, Ocean Protect do provide Filterra bioretention system. So this does, and I don't want to, it's your microphone, Bill. You can do it however you see fit. But he asks, what is Bill's opinion on proprietary bioretention systems? And are they prevalent in North Carolina? So obviously proprietary does include Filterra.
Yes, it would. It would. We do not use a lot of them in our state. It wasn't until about 2017, 2018 that our state, and of all the populous states and of all the fast growing states, of which North Carolina fits both of those. North Carolina was the most restrictive about the use of proprietary systems. Okay. So up until about 2017, 2018, you didn't see many. In 2017, 2018, the state adopted a system, an evaluation tool to permit the use of proprietary systems. Only the proprietary systems where the proprietors felt good about their chances of meeting sediment, nitrogen, phosphorus requirements were tested. Filterra was one of those that was tested. My university, tested 2 of them.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And they were great.
Okay, there you go.
Main thing I would say is that they do need to be maintained. It's always important. Yeah, of course, right? Of course. And the folks that sell Filterra here, I'm sure just like you, Brad, I mean, they tell you the types of maintenance that's needed and how frequently it needs to be maintained. And it's our belief that if you follow, while we didn't test it over the course of a 5-year window, we did test it for 2 years. And we believe if you follow the recommendation, which is basically a significant maintenance once every 2 to 5 years, that a Filterra unit will especially work well at phosphorus removal, metals removal, sediment removal, like those things. It's going to do a really good job.
Geez, I'm going to have to contact you to get that paper, Bill, because I didn't know about that. Robert Atherton, and look, one last question. Robert Atherton asks, Australian soils are likely to be dispersive soils or heavy clay soils, which is why infiltration is often not recommended. He doesn't think that American soils are dispersive. Is that correct, Bill?
It varies. We have some dispersive soils to the west of us. But if I had to just guess, in North Carolina, the footprint of what you're referring to as dispersive soils, it's maybe 10%. It happens to be 10% in some very populated areas. But just so you know, even in these tight clay, high shrink swell soils, we have seen infiltrative losses. They're not significant. It's not like we're losing 80% of the water to infiltration, but we have seen 20%, particularly with internal water storage. We, in fact, almost exclusively with internal water storage, we've seen 20 to 30% water loss. Okay, it's not a ton, but it still counts.
Bill, we might have to stop it there. This has been fantastic. It's been such an interesting chat, and so great to get your perspectives from your experiences over many years and research projects and design projects, and et cetera. So thank you so much for giving up your time today. It's really appreciated. Look, we'll have to get you back on, and I'm pretty keen to get you to talk about Roman infrastructure as well, which I know is a bit of a passion
I'll even wear a toga or something.
Fantastic. And look, for people who would like to reach out to Bill, I think his contact details, feel free to chuck them in the chat if you like, Bill, but I'm sure you're very easy to find it with a quick Google search. If you're keen to know more from Bill, please reach out. I've included a link to the webinar page from Ocean Protect, which will include a recording of this along with Bill's slides. And also, obviously, you can register for our upcoming webinars as well. But again, thank you everyone for dialing in today. Much appreciated. Love the questions, love the comments. And Bill, thanks again so much for your time today.
It's been my great pleasure. Yeah. As I said, I had a wonderful time in Australia a decade ago. It's always great to hear the accent again. I don't know.
We might have to get you back, Bill. I'm just saying.
I would love that. This is my part. I'd love that.
Super. Thanks, Bill. Thanks, guys. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Ciao.